Hello and welcome to episode 314 of the Stacey West podcast. I tried to find something clever to say for episode 314, but my maths is bad and couldn't work anything out. Hopefully someone who will have something clever to say this evening is my co-host, Chris Lamming. How are you doing, sir?
Hello. I'll try. I don't know if I can say something that clever, but we'll try and offer some sort of insight. But I'm all right, thank you. I'm actually pretty pleased we're recording today rather than Monday. The original plan was Monday after... Of course, we couldn't do Sunday because we did a sponsored walk in aid of cancer research with put together by your good dad, which went very well.
A good dad. Have I got another one? Have I got a bad dad?
I was going to say your old man, and then I didn't know what to say. It all went wrong. But yes, I was going to say you're good. Like I always call my missus my good lady, and then I realised that wouldn't work quite well with you. But yeah, that was Sunday. Original plan was then for us to record on Monday evening. Both of us had incredibly busy days and decided it's worth waiting until we play Chesterfield, considering there isn't a game this Saturday, so we can do both games in one episode. So yeah, really pleased that we've waited till Wednesday because I've had a sleep now and I'm in a far better mood than I was on Monday evening. How are you?
Yeah, I did the walk. I thought the walk was okay. I kind of flew by. There was some people that kind of struggled, and I think they're the ones that you take your hat off to. People that don't normally walk. But I've walked further in a day, but it was good. £3,390 as things stand, which includes two TJ Omer shirts and the Sign Squad shirt sold off as well. So thank you to everybody who's watching. Low numbers as expected on a Wednesday evening, but doubtless plenty more listening in later, plenty more watching later. So thank you to everybody who sponsored us. It's absolutely fantastic. If it looks like I'm looking down live, that are people that are watching, sorry, this is rubbish if it's on audio, but it looks like I'm looking down further because I've got I've put a different camera on now. Ooh. And I've had to stand it a little bit higher. I've got like a shelf, and it looks now like I'm basically staring down at my keyboard. I'm not really sure why I've used it either, to be honest. So, but yes, that was the walk. It was very good. I understand that some people remained in the Ivy Club from around 2:30 when we got back, right the way through to the quiz in the evening. I'm assuming that you were not one of those.
I was not. No, we left after a couple of drinks and went home for a little nap. But it appears a good evening was had by all who did stay.
Yeah, not quite by all. And then the next day, and this is something that regular listeners will be delighted to hear, retired Welsh pool international Mark Knowles, who was representing Wales at pool earlier this year, came to my house to give me some pointers in the morning before he left, and I beat him 2-1, 2 games to 1. We had one little game of pool, so I was particularly happy with that, and he left me some drills to do, and I was practicing those earlier, and I do my weights and I do those, and then I play pool in between cool downs, and I couldn't do any of the drills. I was missing all the balls. I was getting really pissed off, so I put the cover back on the pool table and gave up.
Well, I'd say, you beat him, so it doesn't really matter what the drills are, does it? A win's a win. Doesn't matter how you play. Doesn't matter about the performance. It's about the result, isn't it? Just like it maybe was on Saturday.
Anyway, so we've got to talk a little bit. Oh, I thought you were going to say how it was on the pool night when you came over.
I was doing a segue, but never mind.
You need to tell me if you're doing a segue, otherwise I forget and I just talk over you, like Alan Partridge. I'll just talk over you, Lynn. Go on, I'll just talk over you. Rebadged it, you fool. Anyway, what they haven't rebadged is Stevenage. They still do what they say on the tin. Before we talk about Lincoln City, though, you want to talk about Stevenage's style, don't you? Because everybody's criticising it. Jack Moylan said it's a mental way to play football, which was really interesting comments, which didn't get picked up in wider media, which would no doubt have made Jack a little bit unpopular in Stevenage. And you're going to defend it?
Not defend it, just discuss it, really, because I think people do criticise it, but it's kept them in the league last season. They've had a good season playing that, obviously, to get them out of League Two. And let's be brutally honest, we've had elements of that in our last decade of football. Ever since 7 or 8 years since obviously the Cowleys and the success we've had with them. Dare I say, we've been a little bit more refined than what we saw from Stevenage on Saturday. That looks better, by the way. But I think we've had a similar mentality at times, and it has been successful for us. For me, it's a little bit of snobbery to just criticise it for the sake of criticising it because it's not very pretty. Because ultimately, who says how you should play football? Successful football is winning football, in my opinion. The downside of it for me is I think it's got a really definite ceiling. And you can only go so far playing with that style as your only method. So for me, they're going to be perfectly fine this season in terms of staying up. I think we both predicted a drop-off for them from their last season's league position, and I still see that. But I don't think they're going to be anywhere near relegation just because they're going to bully teams. They're going to be so difficult to play against. And if you're not up for it like we were, they'll bundle the ball in the net and they won't concede many goals or chances. But I think they've only got one method. And once you stop that one method and that one threat, then there's nothing else to worry about. And I think for us, we probably have multiple threats. But for me, it's always good to have an element of that direct style in the back pocket. It's always nice to have a target forward that you can play into. It's always nice to have a set piece threat. In addition to
when you do it all the time,
no,
when that's all you've got.
No, that's exactly the point I'm making. Is that on its own, I get the criticism, but I think an element of that is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think a lot of the criticism aimed towards Stevenage is maybe a little, not harsh, but it's almost like anti-football. It's not how the game should be played. It's only really in the last 10, 15 years that the balls in the lower leagues have been played on the ground anyway. For most of us back in the early noughties and 90s, we all had neck ache. And that's not just Lincoln City. That was most football league teams because that's how football was played. So I just not wanted to defend them as such. I just wanted to offer some context to my opinion. It was more of a discussion, really.
Well, it's right. I mean, we were always a long ball team. We were a long ball team under Graham Taylor when we won the league, because obviously Graham Taylor then went on to play that, or variations of that further up. We certainly a little bit more long ball under Colin Murphy. I mean, there's the Graham Taylor documentary in there where he's saying hit Les over the top, hit Les, because balls over the top for the runners is long ball. Whether you're hitting a target man or whether you're hitting over the top for a runner, it's still long ball. We certainly played it under Sam Ellis. That was really bad. John Beck, we were terrible. But I think football's kind of progressed quite a bit in terms of what people expect and how teams want to play football, and that's produced this probably lack of acceptance of what we would call traditional long ball. And it's not particularly a mental way to play football. It's a dated way to play football. You wouldn't get away with playing that, for instance, in the international stage. It's not going to take you into the Premier League these days, which suggests that football's moved on, because it did take you into the Premier League, or certainly in Division 1, teams like Wimbledon played it really well. But let's not forget, and I put this in my article post Stevenage, we played long ball football under Danny and Nicky. It was a variation of, and we perhaps did it with a little more finesse, but we were hitting Reedy. And like you say, it is good to have long ball in your locker, and we do it a little bit. We hit Fred when we can, or play it a little bit longer, even to Ben, where you think it's going to stick, to Ben House. But actually, I think that the snobbery around long ball football and the snobbery around what Stevenage do, there's two facets to it. First of all, when Steve Evans connected with it, it becomes easy to criticise because it's Evans' ball. And then actually the style of football gets lumped in with the manager. You kind of think, well, that's what Steve Evans does. Steve Evans is a knob. So by definition, the style of football that he plays must be knobbish as well. If you kind of take that away, I'm not really sure what I was going to say before that, because I've got talking about Steve Evans and it's kind of put me off. It's kind of put me off my trail.
Well, shall I pick it up then?
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
some really good points there. And I think the point I was making, I do agree with what you're saying, is I just think it's limiting in terms of. I quite like the top 20s kind of floor and ceiling analogy. So you mentioned Portsmouth last season maybe didn't have as high a ceiling as, say, Bolton did, but their floor was higher as well. So, that their worst possible level of performance is a much higher level than lots of other teams, which is why Portsmouth was so successful last season. And I think with Stevenage, you get that with this style of football. You limit risk. You don't concede a lot. But I think the ceiling is just much lower. And having an element of that, I think it's worth. I think it's nice to have that physical threat. You can really bully teams, but when it's your only option, and it's, I know it's a bit of a cliche to having a plan B. I don't think it's about having a plan B. I think it's just having other facets to your plan A, and they don't have that. They just have that one method, which is direct box entries and playoff scraps, really, on the whole. And I think as soon as you're able to stand up to that and deal with it, as we did, by the way, on Saturday, and that's kind of where I was going at the start, then you really just nullify Stevenage. And then once you can get a foothold in the game, which maybe we didn't as much as we'd hoped to, but better teams and bigger teams will absolutely do that to them this season, teams that are more on it. And I just think the criticism on it by itself maybe is a little bit harsh, but it's the fact that they got nothing else to offer other than that one style. I think that's the limit for them.
Do you think the criticism is actually to our detriment? Because when fans get into that rut of criticising Stevenage, criticising Gillingham, criticising Rotherham, common denominator there, by the way, but criticising long ball direct football, when we then go long to Fred for portions of a game, there's this preconception that's in people's heads that go, we don't do that, long ball bad, and so then it reflects onto what we're doing, whereas actually there are a lot of teams that play long passes throughout different periods of games. So does it put more pressure on us, does it, to try and play a little bit more football when people next to me are going, oh, we're just hitting the bloody long ball again, when actually I think it's an important part of football?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I remember Pep Guardiola as obviously someone who is synonymous with tiki-taka. He hates that saying, of course, himself, but it's synonymous with that, playing out from the back, keeping possession, dominating games with short passing. And there was a goal that they scored, it was a few years ago now, where the goalkeeper launched it over the whole of the opposition defence through to whoever was playing up front. I can't remember who it was. I'm just going to say Aguero because he's a Man City player, I remember. And he scored. It was like 2 touches and it was a goal. And the person interviewing him after the game said that wasn't very Man City. How do you feel about that goal? Obviously, it was a goal, but is it the sort of goal you want to score? He said, absolutely. He says, I want to score goals. And what we'd done is we'd manipulated the opposition so that there was space in behind. If you can get the ball to the striker to score a goal, you score a goal. And it's another, because a lot of the modern football comes from Pep, and so I think it's worth referencing him. And another really interesting quote, which I think links into your question, is we don't just pass the ball to move the ball. You pass the ball to move the opposition, to create space to hit it into. And if you're doing that, and then there's space in behind or into a big player that you can clip it into to bypass 6 or 7 of the opposition players, that's a vital part of football. That's where you've created the space to go. How you play is how you create space and where we're trying to find the space. And yeah, I would hate it if we didn't have a direct ball in our locker because we're a little bit snobbish about the ball going in the air. It's a valuable part of football. If it's all you do, you don't create the space in the first place to hit, which is probably the problem that you get with Stevenage and other teams along those lines. But for us, if we can bait teams and move the ball into areas where we can hit space and create threat, which gives a direct pass into Fred where it's 2 passes and a shot away, that's good football, isn't it?
We will drop on to Lincoln in a minute, but two questions, and they're pretty quick fire questions. In terms of long balls per 90 minutes or long passes, and the long pass might be a pass along the floor, but you're unlikely to be playing a 50-yard pass along the floor too regularly. Where do you think Lincoln City rate in the division for long passes per 90 minutes in League One only this season?
I would say about mid-table.
13th, bang on halfway. Where do you think Stevenage rank?
We could expect them to be up there. I'm going to say like 5th or 6th.
You see, you've underestimated that because you know it's a trick question and you were meant to say first. If Ben had been on, he would have walked into the trap.
Well, I knew it wasn't first because I read it at the weekend, but I didn't actually know where Stevenage are.
They're 4th. With 51.98 long passes per 90 minutes. That is around the same. So Wrexham are 50.31, Mansfield 51, Stockport 51.1, Rotherham 51.6, Stevenage 51.9. Above them, Northampton 52.5, Blackpool 53.6, which is a real surprise for me. And that's probably a hint at why Neil Critchley left. and Wickham, shock horror, 58.5. Well, we've managed to pad out 15 minutes of talking about Stevenage without mentioning the game, because pretty much it's going to be hard to talk about anything at all, certainly from the first half of the game, isn't it, other than the style of play.
Yeah, not a lot happened, to be honest, of note in most of the game, to be honest. But yeah, particularly in the first half. And I think that there's partly credit to us here because, as mentioned, I think the build up to this is the fact that Stevenage aren't just these whipping boys that you can go and pass around, because you have to earn the right to be able to do that. They put pressure on you. You can't press a team that doesn't play out. It's impossible to press them. You can only counter press. So it doesn't really play into our strengths to be able to, go and set a pressing trap and win the ball back in certain areas high up the pitch. You've just got to be in a battle. But I think we stood up to the battle really, really well. And we limited Stevenage to just one shot on target in the whole game, 6 shots overall. We were good from a defensive perspective, but we couldn't really quite get a foothold in the game in regards to our regular style in possession. But you're away from home. You stop a team that's horrible to play against. You kind of nullify the threat they have. I thought it was okay. Bar one big chance, of course, for Stevenage in the first half. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was good touch from Wickens. There was a little bit of indecision, Jacko, wasn't it? We've seen that a couple of times. We've seen that indecision. I think was there a mistake in the Burton game? It was almost certainly was it Barnsley? There was something similar in the Arsenal game. Little bit of defensive hesitation. I think Wickens' touch was massive. Just push the boy out wide. You still expect him to get a shot away, but they didn't manage a single shot on target. It was a heart in mouth moment, but you know what? I wasn't particularly concerned. I didn't feel concerned all game about what was going on at one end of the pitch. I felt concerned that what was going on at the other end of the pitch, because we literally created nothing. We didn't have a single shot on or off target in the first half. Do you know that there has only been one other league game where we haven't had a shot on target in the last 12 months, or a shot at all in the last 12 months? And we were leading the game 1-0 despite not having a shot, which was Reading at home with the own goal last season.
Incredible. Yeah, that was
and moving forward, there's only been one opposition team that hasn't had a single shot against us in the last calendar year. And bizarrely enough, we're also going to talk about that game on this show.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting for numbers people. That's it. Look, there was that opening, there was that chance, the one chance. It was a big chance, according to Alex Ravel. You've got to be clinical. You've got to finish it. We score that, we go on and win the game. If he's hanging his hat on that being the reason that they should have won the game, he's living in absolute dreamland. They had an XG of 0.81 in the first half, but Simpson's effort was 0.44 of that. So the rest of it was really just absolutely hopeful, pot shots, block shots, that sort of thing. It was just a non-entity of a game. And it would be really easy for some supporters to go, we did nothing, we weren't good enough. But actually, we did everything we needed to do, bar something in the final third. And I think on this show, that's going to really be the predominant kind of theme, is after a really good start where we're the leading scorers in the division, it's been a week where there's been so little to talk about in that area of the field. And there was so little to talk about really in the second half in that area of the field as well, because again, take the XG away from the penalty, which was 0.76. Our XG was lower than 0.02 in the second half as well. We had one chance against Stevenage and it was from 12 yards.
Yeah, and I think game state goes into that a little bit. Obviously, we weren't threatening, of course. I think our performance on the ball was better in the second half than it was in the first, but we couldn't get the chances away. I would have still felt relatively confident that we wouldn't concede if it stayed 0-0, and I felt we were the better team leading into it. I think if one team was going to score in the second half, it looked more like to be us in the overall play without really either team creating any clear-cut chances. It was a penalty. It was a rash decision. 2 substitutes combining, by the way. JJ McKiernan received the ball off a really nice little layoff by Freddie, who was playing back to goal, and pinned the defender. Lovely little cushions layoff. I think I've seen a little bit of criticism of Fred recently, but a lot of the highlights I've seen from him have been really good link-up play. He maybe doesn't look the most agile, looks a little cumbersome at times, just that's his style. But actually, ball on the deck, just one-touch layoffs and bringing his teammates into play, I think that often gets a little bit overlooked at times. And that was a vital part of giving McKiernan the chance to run with the ball and be brought down for the penalty. And then, of course, ice-cold Jack Moylan slotted it away. And then we saw the game out from there. One thing I think is worth touching on, though, because, of course, Stevenage away was Michael Skubala's first game as Lincoln City manager. So what I've had a look at here is, well, how did we compare performance-wise in that game? Because, Steve Evans is no longer Stevenage manager, so we thought there might be a little shift there, but they play exactly the same as they did under him. It was almost an identical game from a Stevenage point of view as it was last year. So, got a few bits and bobs here from last season. In terms of us going forward, we struggled in that game last season. We obviously struggled in that game this time round. It was 1-0 to us. This time 1-0 to Stevenage last time. Their XG last time, there was 1.88. Ours was only 0.31. So I say from an attacking perspective, we haven't changed. We stood up to their test much, much better, limited them much more. Only had one shot on target, six shots in total. Last time they had 14 shots. So that's huge. Also, touches in the box. Last time, they had 27 touches in our box. If you have that many touches, you're probably going to create something. This time, they had less than half of that. And we had double the number of touches in their box than we did in the game last season.
Is that
as well as
2?
No, it was actually, what do we have? 4 to 8, actually.
Okay.
So there you go. But so it wasn't a lot. It's much less than we've experienced before. But this isn't really an attacking discussion. This is a defensive discussion because last time we got a bit bullied, and this is a nice little test to see how far we've come against this particular style. It's not the sort of style or test that you get that often throughout a season, but you do get it every season. And it's there's if you're playing against three, you mentioned there's 3 teams that play more long passes than Stevenage, so that would indicate you get this at least 4 times a season against each team. So that's 8 matches. That's a lot of points. If you can stand up to that type of test better than you could last time round, then that's extra points on the board. And for me, from a defensive perspective, there's real credit here that we've clearly improved in that regard at nullifying that style. The next step is, can we make sure that we can break that sort of team down and play our game going forward? But we're better than we were last time.
Devil's advocate, Jamie Reid injured, he would have made a big difference. Thought their centre forwards were poor. They obviously having a little bit of an injury crisis. I mean, I just found the whole game particularly boring, and that wasn't any blame on us at all. But it was just, it was turgid. And the thing is, I would say it's one to forget, but literally people are going to say away at Stevenage, and all I'm going to just picture is this big ball of turgidness. But right up, I likened it to a ball of grey plasticine. And it's just like that. It was bland. But we came away with 3 points, and that's all that matters. And at one point, I think we were even second in the table until a couple of late goals went in. It's 4 games in. It's ridiculous to be looking at the table. Bear in mind, last year at this time, we were also quite high up after beating Blackpool and Wickham in our first 2 home games. Interesting, though, that it was the 10th away win under Michael Skubala. It keeps being mentioned that only one manager has got his 10 away wins quicker than Skubala, and that was Bill Anderson. And many people listening to this probably won't be aware of who Bill Anderson was or what he did in history, but he was the manager that gave us 10 years in the old 2nd division. I think he twice got us promoted out of division, would have been Division 3 North back when it was split between North and South. Absolutely legendary manager for the club. So for Michael Skubala to meet that, and bear in mind it's a very, very different game now to how it was then, I think that is super impressive. There was plenty to bring away from the Stevenage game, positivity, in terms of positivity, just not anything that happened on the field at all. The one, like you said, the one decent move that we made in an attacking sense involved JJ McKiernan, who I thought actually came on and was outstanding for the short cameo that he was on, and wanted to make things happen. But other than that, it is a thoroughly forgettable game, and we will move on. At this point, if you are listening at home, Chris has got something to say.
Yeah, well, there's one thing that you haven't mentioned yet, because you said we didn't
don't
take a
want to
lot out of
mention
that from a football perspective, but I think we took a lot out of it defensively. And one person that really impressed with that was Paudie O'Connor, who was my man of the match, despite his red card. I thought we probably ought to address the red
Oh
card
God,
before we
yeah, I
moved
forgot
on.
about that. Yeah, that's how forgettable the game is. I just forgot about it altogether. Go on then, address the red card.
I think it's really harsh. I think it's really harsh. I appreciate he maybe makes the referee make a decision. It's the last kick of the game. He's won a vital header. He's been having an ongoing battle with Cole Piergiani, who is a shithouse, by the way. I knew he was a dominant defender. I didn't realise quite how much of a shithouse he was. So, yeah, that was that, really. But it's a shame because Paudie, I think, was man of the match despite his red card. He was a man mountain, won so many first contacts, was a real leader in that game, and was a big part of why we limited Stevenage to very, very little. Obviously, he's going to miss a big game now in Peterborough. We could obviously do with him in that match, which is a real shame. But yeah, I think the referee, we praised the referee, of course, after our most recent win against Mansfield. Stockbridge was given a reprieve and was kind of given an apology from both of us in regard to his performance. This was crap, wasn't it, from a refereeing perspective?
Yeah,
really didn't help. Yeah, it was a sort of game in which you're always going to get stoppages. You're always going to get the game being slowed down because that's what Stevenage play for. But my God, I would be surprised. I don't know. I don't know if you can find us on Whitescale. I couldn't see it anywhere. I'd be surprised if the ball was in play for much more than half an hour from that game.
It's not on my scout, unfortunately. But then that's not entirely the referee's fault. But he was just picky. He was niggly. He was giving fouls where there wasn't fouls. He was letting then blatant fouls go. He got our penalty right. Controversial opinion. He got their penalty wrong. I think they should have had a penalty. I think it was Elliot List. Jacko may have poked the ball, but Tendai's taken the man, in my opinion. And we were looking at the tackle from Jacko. We're doing that thing again where you look at something that happens in the area different to if it were outside the area. If it's outside the area and one player takes the ball and another one nudges the player and puts him over, it's a free kick. And free kicks are getting more common for really, really weak challenges. David Rock blew up for loads. We're going to move on to the last night's referee, Ricardo. I think his name's Ricardo, who, again, I thought was a little bit overly picky. As soon as you put something in the area, you almost have to pull out an axe and actually gash somebody over the back of the head with it before it's given. And it baffles me. I mean, again, we'll talk in a minute, but there were 4 or 5 instances last night of fouls in the area where if somebody pulls a shirt like that outside the area, it's a foul. So why is it not a penalty? And I think he got it. I think he got the Stevenage one wrong. I think they should have had a penalty, to be honest. I think to the letter of the law, he's right to send off Paudie. When you're on a yellow card, it's a silly thing to do. There's no need whatsoever. He's been baited by Piergiani. We know Paudie's a little bit hot-headed. He had 2 red cards last season, 1 now this season already. You can't rise to it. Incidentally, whilst he was outstanding and he was man of the match, I think as soon as you drop Jacko in there and put Tom Hamer and Sean Rowan either side, you're almost not going to feel the loss personally. And that's the thing, you stick the armband on Jacko as well, not Ethan Arahan, you stick it on Jacko.
Yeah, I think so. Well, he got the armband obviously only for the last few seconds, didn't he? But off Paudie when he got sent off. I think that shows the benefit in the depth we've got in the squad now to be able to do that, which is really nice. I still think it's a shame. And I get your point in that you don't rise to it. But also, when you've been in that sort of game where you've been asked to scrap and fight for everything, you're going to be so riled up. You're going to be so focused. And yeah, of course, the uber professional should keep a calm head in that moment in time. But I do understand why he reacted how he did, and I think a lot of us probably would do something semi-similar. If you've had the 90 minutes that he's just had, he's been marking Piergiani for 90 minutes off every single set piece, and he's won a lot of his battles there. And that big one right at the end, which almost cemented 3 points, I get why he overreacted a little bit, and I think the referee, again, by the letter of the law, probably it's correct. With a bit of common sense, I think you blow final whistle and you let everyone finish the game, and no one's going to mention it. Yeah. So look, that's that.
The mood I've been in this last week, if Carl Piergiani had knocked on my door, I would have smacked him in the face with a snooker ball in a sock. So I can understand. And he'd done nothing to me other than just look like a little bit of a knob on telly on Saturday afternoon while I was watching the game. So Are we all right to move on now, Chris? Do we have your permission? Anything else you want to talk about, or are we good?
No,
We're good to go.
Permission granted.
We're good to go. So 30 minutes we managed to get out of that game, out of Stevenage, which is brilliant because that's about how long the ball was in play for. We will now go to a break. If you are listening at home, where I'm going to tell you that Sky Sports is good, but people who watched Sky Sports last night don't think it was. I was all right because I think I watched the Stevenage game from Spain, so I didn't have to listen to whatever Sky Sports had got to say. If you are watching on YouTube, there'll be a little peek behind the curtain, and then we will be straight back into it. We're ready to go. Just this is a YouTube special. Andy Brown thinks that Piagiani should have had a yellow in the first half, and at one point he was refereeing the game.
Well, it's a good point actually, because the amount of times that the referee kind of went and spoke to him to tell him to stop grappling, and all those things, and then it was just warning after warning after warning without actually a card. It's a good point. It's a really good point.
I like the word grappling. What a shame that's not going to be in the proper podcast.
Never mind.
YouTube special, grappling. And we will come back in 3, 2, 1. Right, moving on. Some of you may have gone to the game last night. Very few did. 2,200-ish, I think. Saw the debut of Eric Ring. Saw the debut of Saxon Early. I'm not sure which of those names I like best, to be honest. An amalgamation of the two would be Saxon Ring. And if you find one of those, you might be well off, because I think they'd be worth a small fortune. Anyway, it was Chesterfield in the Bristol Street Motors Trophy, the EFL Trophy, the Mickey Mouse Trophy, however you wish to brand it. I actually think there's scope there for Disney to get involved with this. It wouldn't cost them a huge amount of money to actually sponsor it as the Mickey Mouse Trophy. It'd throw us all, wouldn't it? Because we'd be saying it and we'd actually be saying what it was sponsored as rather than taking the Michael. Mickey Mouse Trophy. Chesterfield had already won one game, albeit on penalties, so they had 2 points. Man City had 1 point. We were on 0 point with Grimsby. Chesterfield come along, first time we've played them at Sincil Bank. Since we beat them, I think it was 2-0 at our place. Michael Boswick and an own goal, I believe, something like that in our title-winning season. First time we've played them in this competition since beating them 4-3, thanks to a Gary Taylor-Fletcher extra time goal in about 2004. Widely expected.
Did you? That's weird. I remember that game more than the league win he just mentioned. That's bizarre. Why do I remember that?
Yeah. Might have been the league. I remember one league win we won 3-1. Was that when the helicopter came on the pitch, or it was a fan?
Oh, yes. It was an issue. Yeah, it was an evening game, wasn't it?
And we won 3-1 at their place. Michael Boswick scored in both games that season, home and away against Chesterfield. I remember that, and they were terrible. Anyway, nobody scored in this game for Lincoln City, but we made multiple changes. They made multiple changes. I think the expectation was, being brutally honest, that we were going to win this game relatively comfortably. They made 8 changes from the team that lost against Gillingham. We have, in the past, done quite well, putting plenty of goals past lower league opposition. But Michael Skubala is now 0 from 3 against lower league opposition in cups. We lost to Accrington in this competition last season under his watchful eye. Harrogate earlier in the season, and in almost an exact rerun of the Harrogate game, almost, we go down 1-0 against Chesterfield. Let's talk a little bit about team selection, because there was, I think, a couple of surprises and a couple of non-surprises. Not a surprise that G-Cock gets a game. I think that the plan was for G-Cock to go out on loan and ideally into League Two. Jamie Pardington, it sounds like he's the player that got injured. Jack G-Cock stuck around. So instead of playing Wickens in the Cup, because bear in mind, Lucas Jensen played in this Cup for Skubala last season. But instead of that, we played G-Cock. I thought he had a decent game. Across the back, no real surprise apart from potentially Pordy starting. But Lewis starting and Tom Hamer starting, you'd expect. Adam Jackson probably not going to start. Sean Rowan not going to start. So we're not really left with anywhere to go there. Fullbacks, no real surprises. Ethan Arahan starting. A surprise, potentially. Certainly, I think Tom Bailey starting was a surprise. No McKinnon, I don't think, in the squad. Certainly, I might be wrong about that. I can't recall him coming on. Any surprises for you?
Well, yeah, I think what you just mentioned, I agree. To see Pordy and Ethan, particularly Ethan, actually to start, was surprising for me. But Michael mentioned pre-match that he wanted to win the game. Yes, there was going to be some rotation to give lads an opportunity that deserved it through merit. that haven't necessarily had that opportunity yet in the league as much as they would have hoped. It was a big opportunity for them to impress. But he was pretty adamant both before and after the game that he picked a team that was capable of winning the game, that was there to win the game. We wanted to take the competition seriously. So this is going to be a massive disappointment result-wise. But I was expecting to see Ethan probably not start this game. But I think the Harrogate game really proved that as soon as he went off the pitch, we were much worse because he went off at half time. I think or just after half time in that game. So yeah, in terms of selection of players that did play, that maybe had been brought in, I wasn't too surprised, but I was surprised to see him start.
It was our first team. It was the midfield that started against Stevenage started this game. Had we played on Saturday against Northampton, I think that might have been different. Conor McGrandle's obviously still injured. Rico, obviously. Did I hear Rico a couple of weeks away from coming back? I think that was something that may have been mentioned yesterday, unless I'm getting my research from Ben there because he listened pre-match. I got stuck on a long dog walk. And then up top, obviously, Fred and Ben's Rob Street.
Yeah, Michael said on Rico that he's taken a slight step back in his progress. He's still not far away, but he's not as close as they first thought. So I wouldn't read too much into the 2 weeks. But I don't know.
You're telling me that Ben lied to me, basically.
No, I'm just saying that Ben's information may be a little bit out of date. Who knows? Or maybe it's correct. I'm only going what Michael said in his post-match press conference. But yes, Freddie Draper, Rob Street starting up top together. So Belly Cadamartri still having to wait for his first start in a Lincolnshire, but of course, come on in both games. I really felt that there was a team here that was more than capable of winning the game, particularly after Chesterfield had made as many changes as we had. And to be honest, the first half looked like we all expected it to. It looked like we were pretty well set up to win the game. Chesterfield didn't have a single shot, only had 40% of possession. We kept the ball from them really well. They weren't able to press us at all, really. Their PPDA was all the way up at 14, which means that they were allowing us to have 14 passes before they were able to force an interception or the ball to go out of play. There was lots of really, really good passages in the first half. We were honestly, utterly dominant without creating that real clear-cut opportunity, which would be a frustration for Michael Stukabala. And of course, without being, the word he used, of course, is ruthless. So without being ruthless and actually getting the goal that our overall play probably deserved, despite the actual quality of chances that we created, didn't deserve.
Sorry, I'm just shaking my head because while you've been going through that, I actually just messaged Ben to say who said Rico's 2 weeks away. And Ben has now replied with, I asked the lad who made his new PC. He asked him. Oh, my God. That's where we're getting our information from. Anyway, we'll carry on. I can see the look on your face. Why put something in an official chat that comes from the guy who makes his PC? Oh, my dear. Yeah, look, we were dominant in the first half. I actually thought we were really good, bar that final kind of, not going to say final ball. I'm actually going to pick on somebody again in a minute, and I've done it already once this season, and I don't want it to look like a vendetta. But there was one thing lacking really, and that was a toe on the end of some of the crosses. I thought Eric Ring had a superb first half. He really looked really positive, got on the ball, wanted to run at players, wanted to put the ball in the box. I thought Jack Moylan, lots of positive runs. I thought Fred held the ball up quite well. Dylan Duffy was putting some good balls in the box. Chesterfield had 0 shots, 0 XG, 0 everything. They had 42% possession. We dominated apart from putting a ball in the net. And you were going to get people on social media, or you'll get stood next to somebody in the pub who tell you that we need a Joe Taylor figure because Joe Taylor scored goals last season. I'm not entirely sure that we need that. I think that we've got it in the squad. I just think, again, at the moment, it's hard to see what Rob Street is. Now, it's going to happen. I'm not saying he's a bad player. He put himself about a lot last night, but there was a couple of times, I think, where he lost the ball. I don't think there was a huge surprise that he came off at half time. Personally, I thought he struggled a little bit. And Jimmy Walker was saying on comms that it's great that Fred played a lone striker, and sometimes it's easier to play a lone striker that is in a two, because at least if he's up there on his own, he knows where he's got to be and he knows where his runners are going to be. But we said this against Harrogate, by the way, and I'm going to say it again now. There was a complete disconnect between the front two, and it's the same disconnect that we saw many moons ago when John Marquis and Tom Hopper played up front. There were just two different people doing different things, and whether that's to one's detriment, two's detriment, no detriment, I don't know. I was surprised to see Rob Street start. I actually thought we'd start Bailey Cadamarteri. And I'm not saying that the reason we didn't score in the first half was down to Rob Street. I just think there was that kind of disconnect between the two strikers. Certainly Fred didn't have a particularly bad game, but other than that, I don't know how we didn't get on the end of some of the crosses. There wasn't that runner to the front post, runner to the back post. And the sad thing is, by the time Bailey came on in the second half, the player that you think could do that, the legs had perhaps gone out of the two wing backs. And so we didn't get as many balls into the box, and we didn't do the same things. We made some changes. So it's easy. There's been a lot of criticism of the game on social media, and I'm not going to call people out. We're not opinion police. If you think we played badly, we played badly. I don't think we did. It's really easy to forget how good we were, I think, in the first half.
Yeah, I think, if it was the other way around, if you went 1-0 down early in the first half with the performance that we put in the second half, but let's imagine that was in the first with the same result, and then we were pushing the game and we had the performance that we had in the second half, and oh God, it's hard to say. I'll try again, shall I? If we were 1-0 down early in the game with the performance that we put in the second half yesterday, so it was flipped on its head, and then we had our first half performance in the second. There we go, got there. I think a lot of us have come out of the game thinking, I was unlucky to lose that. Okay, it was one goal they scored a goal off one or two opportunities. It was all they really had in the game. We were pushing the game in the second half. We had loads and loads and loads of threats. Just needed someone on the end of one of those balls, and then we'd have deserved to win the game. That's how most of us come out of that game, I think. If it was the other way around, it's because we were good in the first half, but that was obviously before what happened in the second, which was a real drop-off in performance. There's no denying that. I'll explain a couple of stats to kind of show that in a mo. And also, I think sometimes you've got to credit the opposition, because we weren't anywhere near ourselves in the second half compared to the first, but actually Chesterfield were much better. It's certainly in possession of the ball. They were better out of possession in regard to their pressing as well. They won the ball back far better than they did in the first half. They reduced their PPDA almost by 2/3. So it was a huge improvement in that regard. So I think it was probably unlucky, but there's no denying that it was disappointing. You kind of expect Michael Skubala teams. I think we've come to expect now that we actually get better as the game goes on. So to have a couple of cup performances where the second half has been a step down compared to the first has been disappointing, but that doesn't tarnish that the first half was utterly dominant. So we had, let's have a look here. In the first half, 63 accurate forward passes, whereas Chesterfield only had 32. In the second half, we only had 46, so a huge decrease in that. Total accurate passes was 190 in the first half. It was only 110 in the second. So again, a huge decrease, whereas Chesterfield's actually in possession was similar in terms of accurate passes. They just won the ball back better and was able to control the game at times. Partly, I think that's due to some players that haven't had a huge amount of time on the pitch, maybe tiring a little bit of just cohesion, because these players haven't played together very much. You only get that by playing games, and you have to play somewhere. And this competition is a good opportunity for that, despite us wanting to take it seriously. It was, but there's no denying that there was a big drop off in that second half from us.
There was. And I don't think some people have gone, it's because Ethan Narag came off. It's not. He came off later on. It was just a drop off. And I don't really understand why. And I don't think it's a lack of us wanting to go and win the game. One or two people have said it's been a conscious decision for us not to go and win the game. There's zero doubt that League One is the focus. But nobody goes out with an intent not to try and win a game. And I think we were trying to win. And let's not forget, like you say, Chesterfield actually defended really well. I thought Shea Dunkley was immense for them. And I really like Jamie Grimes as well. I thought he was strong and he fought well. And, Fred tried to put himself about. Some criticism of Fred, as you said, because why he hasn't popped up with the 10 goals he scored against Walsall. But actually, I think he's done the job that we've asked of him. And I look at Fred now playing, I don't see a youth team player anymore. I see a senior first team player, which I think is really important. But the second half was just stodgy. And look, the XG says that they deserved to score 1.09, but actually, if you look at their XG, it all came, or almost all of it came from the one chance, from the save from Wickens, and then the subsequent shot. I think outside of that, they only had 2 other efforts, which were half shots, pot shots with lower than 0.1 XG. So we still had good opportunities, we got into good positions, but I think there was just a decision of some bad decision making. Sorry, a case of some bad decision making. I think once or twice Jack Moylan, really good forward thinking, perhaps just wanted an extra touch once or twice. In the first half, there were some lovely balls through. One hit Fred on the shoulder. Another one was just a heavy touch from Rob Street, where on another day, I think those would have gone in. However, I do think that there are some things that we can take and learn from this, because it was a weakened Chesterfield side. There is no doubt. I'm not going to sit here and say I don't care about the competition, because I do. I'm not going to sit here and say that it was a strong side. It wasn't. The 11 that started that game should have had enough to score goals in the first half, and the 11 that finished the game should have had enough to see out the game. And instead, we've got a Harrogate situation where one mad moment, and that's what it was, one moment of poor defending. And when you watch it back, it's easy to apportion blame. I'm not going to do that on here. It's too early in the season to be calling people out, and certainly in a BSM trophy game. But you take that out of it, and that game goes to penalties, no doubt whatsoever. So, but one thing also to bear in mind, even though it was a kind of a much changed Chesterfield side, when we first came out of the National League, our first season, we went and won the trophy. Salford, I think, got through to the final in their first season, potentially might have been their second season. Teams that come out of the National League find this competition brilliant, because it's not the FA trophy. They don't have to go to Bishop Stortford or name a club that sounds like a solicitor or a pub team or a police team. They're playing real teams. Chesterfield, they were vocal. They were actually singing at a BSM trophy game. I don't know if you heard it. They actually sung some songs. Yeah. So they were up for it. And when they started bringing on Will Grigg and they started bringing on Liam Mandeville, they had treated it in the way that you would expect it to be treated. But I remember us going and winning games. I remember us beating Peterborough 4-2 in that season. Yeah, I remember us beat play Notts County. I can't remember if we beat Notts County. It was Notts County, Everton under 21s we played, and somebody else. We were up for it every single game. Whereas some of the teams that were a little bit more Mickey Mouse Trophy weary, perhaps take it as more of a training game. And I think at times, certainly in the second half, our tempo and some of our decision making felt more like a pre-season friendly than it did a blood and thunder cup tie. Now, whether that's disrespectful to the supporters that are there or not, some say yes, some say no. I don't think it's a conscious thing, but I think it's quite easy for certain players when they see an Oshin Gallagher coming on or a Kamson Kamara on the bench who are out at Peterborough Sports. It takes away a little bit, I think, of the intensity of the game purely by their presence, not because of who they are, not because of what they can offer, but purely by the fact, well, we brought this lad back from Peterborough Sports to play because it's this competition. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense, yeah. I don't know how much. I suppose it depends on just a player's personality. And I think one thing we mentioned on our live show last week is actually it's really great to have Jez on that explain this as well, in that the amount of thought that goes into not just signing good footballers but good people with good personalities. You'd like to think that mentality doesn't creep in as much as maybe it could at other teams. One thing that Michael said after the game, and I think this is a really good point, is that it wasn't a lack of effort from the players. They ran around. The sprint numbers and all that, I imagine, was exactly the same as it would be for a league game. It was just, cohesion, and it was just maybe decision making, and that will come as this group of players. Because let's think, compared to the teams that started most of our league games this season, most of those players that are starting the league games were here last season. Part of the squad last season. There's only Tom Bayliss, I think. Who else was there? Just Tom.
Starting last night.
Started on Saturday. That wasn't here last season. And Tendai, of course. They were the only 2 players, I think, that were not part of the squad last season. Whereas in this competition,
Dom Jeffries.
Of course, Dom Jeffries. There we go. 3. So the vast majority of that team are on method, are on it with each other, maybe have got that more cohesion and understanding of not just the overall tactics and shape, but those intricacies in the game and the specific moments that take a little bit of time to learn. And when you make as many changes, or it's more not even about making changes, it's about having as many players on the pitch who haven't been here as long. Maybe that's something to do with it as well, in terms of, you can run around, but it's how you run around, which makes a difference, doesn't it? So I would hate for anyone to criticise a team in regard to being lazy. Lazy is one of the worst criticisms. I hate it. It was lazy. It made a lazy decision, or he's looked lazy. They're not bloody lazy, or most people aren't. It's how you apply yourself and in the right moments, and it's just getting that right. And that will come. It was just disappointing not to get the result that our overall play deserved on Tuesday. And it's another case of the result maybe tarnishes the performance a little bit. But you know what? Let's be honest, we probably deserved to draw the game on Saturday. We're pleased we won. So we've got a good result from a performance that was good in terms of defensive solidity. But let's be honest, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a lot to talk about. And if it wasn't a 1-0 win, we'd probably be, a lot of the fan base might be criticising the performance. Whereas in this one, we got a decent performance, particularly in the first half. Didn't get the result we wanted. I'd rather it this way around. As much as I like this competition, you want the points in the league, and that's what we got. And if this was the option that we were given at the start of the week, it's definitely the results I'd have picked.
It's interesting what you say there about cohesion, because actually I've just been through the Chesterfield first team, and only 2 of the Chesterfield starting 11 yesterday were not at the club at the end of last season. So there was only 2 signings, I think, Vontae Campbell and Kane Drummond, who have come in over the summer. Vontae Campbell came in from Peterborough, and Kane Drummond came in from Macclesfield. Now, for us, Zach Geacott, so this is really around cohesion, because it's easy to say they made changes, but Chesterfield have made changes for players that have been Chesterfield players that have been with them at least 6 months or more. Some of them joined last January. We had Zach Geacock, Tom Hamer, Tom Bayliss, Eric Ring, and Rob Street all starting, who weren't here last year. Of those, you've obviously got Rob Street, who hasn't started in the league yet. You've got Eric Ring, who was making his debut. Then from the bench, we brought on Saxon Early, Dom Jeffries, and Bailey Cadamarteri. Bailey Cadamarteri, who's only been with us a week. Saxon Early, who's only making his debut. So actually, that lack of cohesion could be explained away a little bit by that. Yes, they made changes, and yes, we made changes, but just making changes isn't necessarily the barometer of how well those players know each other or do not know each other. Now, I won't be losing any sleep over the Chesterfield defeat. Had we lost against Stevenage, the point you make is absolutely spot on. I would have lost sleep. And if you'd said to anybody at the beginning of last week, which one would you want to win? They would have gone, well, Stevenage. Of course, you'll get people who go, well, I want to win both. You get the win good, lose bad situation. I actually think we were better against Chesterfield than we were against Stevenage, and the results came out on the other way. So what we have now, though, is a break of around 11 days, 10 days as we're recording. So we are going into the international break, which will affect your favourite podcast schedule. We may still do something on Sunday around questions or something along those lines. We got asked a question about, after the transfer window's closed, do we like to change our predictions for any team? So we might do a general League One kind of podcast to answer that, I think, rather than trying to do so now. What do we reckon?
That's a good idea. The answer is yes to that question, by the way. So maybe we can expand on that on Sunday, potentially, depending how sore our heads are, of course.
Of course, yeah. Well, I was meant to be going to look at a camper van in Wisbeach, but it's got 209,000 miles and I've been talked out of it. So, but I may be looking at one in Rugby this week as well. So, it's my cousin's. He's selling one. Right. It needs kitting out. So, we do have some other business, of course. Last night, I got an email saying Clive is leaving the club, which, well, not an email, a kind of a message, and some more balanced people kind of came back to me and said that's not quite what's happening, but he was removed as a person of significant interest, I believe, or significant share. I will word it significant control of the holdings company. Now, it's really important to note, and the club have put this statement out, after further planned investment into Lincoln City Holdings Limited, natural dilution has occurred, which means Clive Nates now holds less than 25% of the shares issued. I think that should be fewer, if Pete Summers is listening, fewer than the 25% issued. I have to correct that because otherwise he will do it for me. He, Clive, not Pete, has therefore been removed as a person of control at Companies House. This is procedural only. For avoidance of doubt, Clive Nates remains chairman of Lincoln City Holdings and Lincoln City FC, and the current ownership model and decision-making structure remains the same. So just to underline it, whilst there's a clamour these days to be either the first with news or to understand everything, people have got alerts at Companies House, and people like me type in different domains and search Sweden to see what's happening. We all want to be one step ahead, and it's really, really easy to misread what's going on. So it's been misread. Clive's staying put, and that's a good thing, isn't it? Because how long would a podcast be paying tribute to Clive on what he's done for this football club?
Oh yeah, a week probably non-stop, I'd say. Okay, there's obviously a reason that we haven't opened the podcast with this news, because it is thankfully
non-news,
not news. Yeah. So yeah, nothing's changed. It's just procedural. We've got some more investment into the club, which is great. And that just means that the overall percentage of shares that Clive holds is below a threshold, which means something legal happens at Companies House, but nothing has changed in regard to his interest and stature at Lincoln City. So that's obviously a huge positive. If there was any concern, you can chill out and not worry about that now, and we can look forward to playing Peterborough a week on Saturday instead.
Of course, that's planned investment, I think, as well. So it's quite often when there's investment, people go, "Oh, there's somebody new," but I think it's the existing structure, the planned investment coming into the club. But it's still a good thing. It's still nice to see that the people who are committed to the club, at board level, are kind of popping money in, because ultimately we're still not sustainable. We still lose millions of pounds every year, just like other football clubs do, but we just lose it in a better way than other people. And unlike long ball football, there really is a good and a bad way to lose money, and we do lose money in a good way. Finally, talking about we're going on to talk about charity now. So there is a thing gone out earlier saying that there was a draw winner this month. I'm not quite sure how it works, which is Kerry and Lindley Cochrane have won some sort of draw, and I think whether it's I don't know if it's kind of a charity draw. I don't fully understand it, if I'm honest.
Yeah, same. I just saw the headlines. I thought, oh, I know that name. This is good, so I wanted to share it. I'm not actually sure. We probably should know what's going on at the football club in this regard, but neither of us are particularly sure what this draw is.
Well, it says August's monthly prize winners are Kerry and Lindley Cochrane, owners of the Adam and Eve pub, which they're not, by the way. And they will be raising money for the charity Calm, which is really close to our hearts. I've known Kerry for many, many years. He was working at Rugby Plastics when I first went there in 1996. So I've known Kerry, or of Kerry, for 30 years. And I remember him being this huge, booming Welshman with long hair and a beard, and he's a phenomenal guy. Raises money for Calm after tragically losing a son a few years ago who you at school with.
Yeah, so quite pretty close really in this story, because Kerry was actually my very first ever football manager. He was manager of rugby under 10s. He was the first person that gave me an opportunity to play football, and I'm quite fortunate myself to have achieved a reasonable amount in the sport in my younger days, and it wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have done any of it if it wasn't for Kerry Cochrane giving me that opportunity, and him and his son Lloyd, we were the same age, and Lloyd of course played in the same team, and tragically Lloyd took his own life. I think it might be 11 or 12 years ago now, and ever since then, Kerry and Lindley, his mum and dad, or dad and mum should I say, have been relentlessly been raising awareness of mental health, male suicide, and raising money for Calm. So the campaign against living miserably, it's a superb charity, do so much. Over the last decade or so, they've raised tens of thousands of pounds, and there's an event on. They do it every year at the Adam and Eve in Rugby, the weekend closest to Lloyd's birthday, which was, I believe, the 11th of September, and so this Saturday the 7th, they'll do some live music on. There's a really good prize draw, raffle draw. Elliot Morris and the Volts are playing, and it's all in aid to raise some money for a fantastic cause. It's actually going to be the first one I've ever missed, which I'm absolutely gutted about. Obviously, we'll be donating and I'll be there in spirit, but it's nice to kind of give it the little platform that it deserves on this podcast, because, as you say, it's a charity both so close to our heart. It's a family close to mine and yours hearts as well. So if anyone can we appreciate everyone always asks for donations these days. We've just done a charity walk, but if anyone has any spare 50p, 5 quid, 10 quid, whatever it is you've got, it will go to a incredibly important place.
Yeah, I seem to think I'd just done something for Calm last year. Did I run 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers in a month or something? I did.
Yes,
I remember
you came to that event and then donated it on the day.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I remember that now. The draw is actually a charity draw that the club do monthly for a signed shirt to raffle for the cause. So that's what's actually been won.
Brilliant.
So Chris and I'll both share that on social media for anybody who wants to get involved. So we end on a really important promotional plug. And it's always nice to say the word promotion here on the Stacey West podcast. At the beginning of the week, we took another step towards it. There were a lot of steps to take, 42, but 3 of the 4 steps that we've taken, we've done very well. Promotion's a long, long way away. But if we do keep playing like that, picking up away wins and picking up 9 points from 12, we'll be there or thereabouts at the end of the season. Probably won't be there or thereabouts in the Bristol Street Motors Trophy. But I'll let you guys decide which of those you think is more important. We're off to record another show immediately after this. For those of you that like fantasy football, that'll be on YouTube. It'll be half an hour and it's me versus Chris. If you're interested to see who's winning and who's not, please do tune in. Other than that, we will be back at some point over the weekend. Up the Imps.
Up the Imps.